Why, hello. Welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you here for this episode. And I'm joined again by my friends, Glenn and Tom, and I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest, and I've written a number of things. And I am a senior editor for Touchstone Magazine. Anyway, enough about me. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself, Glenn?
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, Ministry Associated Reflections Ministries. I have my own ministry as well called Every Square Inch Ministries. I write, I speak, and I don't do a whole lot else these days.
All right, Tom.
I'm Tom Price. I teach Christian theology and ethics and philosophy, and one of the places is Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary.
Okay. Well, it's my day today, and I have come across something from New Oxford Review. For folks who aren't familiar with New Oxford Review, it's a kind of reactionary, in a good sense, publication by traditionalist Catholics. It's kind of fun. Hey, you got your friend there.
This is little Augustine. He will probably sit on my shoulder the whole show.
Hey, Augustine, good to see you. Good name.
Sorry about that.
No, so if you don't follow us on YouTube, you need to, because you can see Tom's new cat on his shoulder. Checking out Tom. Anyway, a little comedy relief, which is appropriate for the topic of the day. So this article is entitled "How Cowardice, the Herd Mind, and Twitter Mobs Threaten Academia." A conversation about the clannish Inquisition. It's a little play on the Spanish Inquisition. So the clannish Inquisition. No one expects the clannish Inquisition. Actually, we do. It's pretty much something that we count on these days. This is written by, in the form of a conversation. I guess this term that they use for this conversation, and maybe as a literary form that's common or part of intellectual life in Japan, it's a taidan. I guess that's how it's pronounced. It's as it's rendered in English is Taidan. Taidan. I think that's how it's pronounced. Anyways, the interlocutors are Jason M. Morgan. He's a contributing editor for the New Oxford Review, teaches history, philosophy, and international relations at Reikaku University in Kashiwa, Japan. I think I said those names correctly. If I've gotten those place names wrong, don't hold it against me. And then the other party in the conversation is J. Mark Ramsayer, and he's the Mitsubishi professor of Japanese legal studies at Harvard Law School. And they co-authored a book entitled "The Comfort Women Hoax, a Fake Memoir, North Korean Spies and Hit Squads in the Academic Swamp." And it's published by Encounter, which is a great publishing house, and is a kind of a higher brow version of Regnery when I think about those two publishing houses. So Encounter tends to be for the middle to upper brow types. Anyway, so the conversation is about the response to their work, and the attempt by many, it sounds like hundreds, if not thousands, of academics, we're not just talking about trolls online, but academics, to cancel them.
Is there a difference?
They failed to do that. I think they're both still employed and teaching where they've been teaching, but this is a set of reflections on the response or the woke mob's attacks. So, what precipitated the attack? Well, I don't know a whole lot about the comfort woman controversy except this. I know Glenn can fill us in, and he will in a minute. But when I've heard it referred to, it's been more or less it's a fait accompli that during Imperial Japan's occupation of Korea, there were prostitutes who were more or less pressed into service in Japan to serve the sexual needs of Japanese soldiers, particularly officers. And this is evidence not just of Japan's horrendous treatment of Koreans, but of the patriarchy, right? This is something that feminists, women, scholars who have a feminist outlook are inclined to use as an example of the horrid state of kind of human history and the treatment of women, kind of across the boards. These two scholars say, hold on a minute, it didn't actually work that way, and then they do the actual hard work of demonstrating their point and trying to argue for what did happen based on the records. What do we know? We have data to work with. What does it say? And the point that they make, I've not read the book. I'm just kind of working based on what they say about the response, that they did a pretty good job of showing that the conventional wisdom concerning the comfort women was not correct. Anyway, Glenn, can you fill us in a little more on maybe the nature of the controversy? Did I sum it up okay, or have I missed anything?
That's pretty much it. The overall situation with comfort women was not just Korea. It also included the Philippines, my guess China, but I'm not absolutely sure of that. I know it hit the Philippines and Korea. They're looking specifically at a raid, I guess you would call it, that took place ostensibly on a specific island where the women were kidnapped and basically forced into sexual slavery.
Right.
Now, the entire narrative that happened was based on a memoir that was released by someone that was proved to be fictional.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, even the Japanese paper that originally, sort of like the Japanese equivalent in the New York Times, the paper that originally published it issued a retraction. They retracted it and everything else. However, by that point, it was way too useful for propaganda purposes. And as a result, it has deeply embedded itself in particularly feminist discourse in the United States. This carries over to other places as well. There were statues put up of comfort women, in memoriam and all of that. But so the idea that this didn't really happen, it was controversial overseas as well. But for our purposes, what's really important is the impact that this study had in the U.S., because it took one of the sacred cows that was being held up by feminism and turned it into hamburger.
Right. Now, like I said, I don't know the full extent of the treatment, but this is not to imply that there never were women pressed into sexual slavery in the history of the world.
Or even by the Japanese. This is really limited to a single island, which became sort of the prototype for the way the Japanese operated in people's minds, except it never happened the way the guy reported it, which calls into question the whole comfort women's story. But it doesn't mean that in other instances it didn't occur.
This reminds me of so many other things. It reminds me of, Margaret Mead's treatment of sexuality or sex in the South Pacific amongst Polynesians.
Yeah, coming of age in wherever it was.
Samoa, coming of age in Samoa, where she sort of made this Rousseauian kind of noble savage argument where, here we have these people who are engaged in all kinds of sexual behavior before marriage, and there was no taboo that they were breaking. This is all just kind of innocent fun and shouldn't. And the implication was, why are we so hung up here in the West? Turned out it was all made up. She didn't actually demonstrate these things were so. And my understanding is that people in that part of the world, when they hear Margaret Mead, they roll their eyes and say she didn't have any idea what was really the case. But it also goes into kind of so I guess my thought is about this is there is a kind of vital lie. In other words, you remember the vital lie, the necessary lie, that we learn about in the Republic, where Plato makes a point about social castes or classes. And he's saying, if we tell the truth, people are not going to be able to accept the truth.
Mhm.
So we need a story that will justify what we're doing. And it becomes known, as people refer to that as the vital lie. If I remember correctly, it had to do something along the lines of people from different social classes were made from different kinds of metals, that kind of thing. And so, consequently, the implication was that people are essentially different. They have different gifts, and we all know that's true. We know that people are there are a range of gifts, but they're not so neatly distributed as this vital lie seemed to imply. Things in reality are more mixed up. But the lie is vital because it helps to sustain a particular project. And in this case, feminist scholarship has become so dependent upon this story that many of the things that people have used to sort of justify conclusions when they've used this false understanding of what happened are called into question. So, and that's giving it more credit than maybe it's due.
You do tend to see this in academics a lot. I mean, this is sadly, and in these kind of what they almost become cliches that everyone holds to. I mean, you see every now and then I'll see these little clips of somebody interviewing someone on campus, and it's always the same line: patriarchy, white cabin. This whole list that has not even been thought about by any of these people. It has just been taken as a sort of chant. But the evidence just, when you start to dig down into a lot of the claims and weigh it against the complex nature of reality, these things don't support what most people, the political mileage they try to continue to get from them. And they only work because they have become, located in people without much critical evaluation of them.
Right.
In some ways, it reminds me of what happened during the Renaissance in the academic world. What most people don't realize is that the universities didn't really welcome the ideas coming out of the Renaissance, because what they were doing is applying a totally different methodology to studying. And I'm not going to go into the details there, but just to pick one example, the theologians argued that Greek should not have any priority over Latin in theological studies, because even though the New Testament was written in Greek, the sign on the cross was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And Latin was the most recent of the biblical languages, therefore. And so Jerome's translation was the best one to use. The Latin Bible was the one that mattered. Now we would argue, wait a minute, this doesn't, and the humanists argued this doesn't make sense. It was originally written in Greek. But then you get someone like Erasmus comes along and comes up with a fresh translation from the Greek into Latin. You would think they would say, okay, well, it's Latin, it's okay. No, because the way the scholastics work is they develop these long chains of reasoning based on the specific wording of the Vulgate. You change the translation and the wording changes, and their whole theological argument falls down like a house of cards. So they opposed even that. So anytime you question, now that's it's only a distant analogy here, but the point is that anytime you question received wisdom in a field in the academy, you're going to get attacked, and you're going to be attacked. Frankly, it can get pretty vicious, and that's what these guys discovered.
Well, let's recount some of the viciousness here for the sake of our listeners. I don't think this will surprise anybody who listens to us or has attended to the Twitter mob phenomenon on Twitter, or X as it's known now. But let me just take a page from the article, and so this is Ramsayer and Morgan. And Ramsayer begins: historians in Japan and South Korea had a field day tearing gaping holes in the completely fake account. Eventually, as you noted, Glenn, even the Asahi, I guess that's what it's, or Asahi Shimbun, I probably brutalized that, the equivalent of the New York Times in Japan, and the paper that helped spread the hoax in the first place, retracted all its articles based on Yoshida's made-up memoir. But somehow the American historians never got the memo. This is Morgan speaking now. They apparently missed all the work done by historians in Japan, historians in Korea, and the Asahi. Asahi. Okay, thank you. To this day, the Americans recycle the sex slaves rounded up on Jeju Island nonsense. You gently pointed out that it was all bunkum. And for your trouble, you got death threats and news crews stalking you at your house. Ramsayer. Ramsayer, isn't he the guy at Harvard? So this is a Harvard legal scholar who's getting harassed in Cambridge. Then there were the petitions. This is Ramsayer. 3,000 people, some of them Nobel laureates, signed one petition. 30,000 signed another. 30,000. Thousands and thousands of people signed petitions trying to get me fired from Harvard, and my paper retracted. Professors, tenured professors at first-tier universities, called me a racist and a white supremacist and a fraud. One of my colleagues at Harvard implied he had examined the materials I used in my paper and declared I didn't have any evidence of the Comfort Women's contracts. Apparently forgot that Harvard Library was closed for COVID-19 at the time and didn't realize I had checked out all the materials to my office anyway. But never mind. To the thousands of people in the mob, I was a misogynist, a fascist, and who knows what else. And the surely you must be joking category, American academics tried to tie me to a mass shooting in Buffalo, to a murder of a Korean spa worker in Atlanta, and to violence against women in Afghanistan. So this is the greeting that his meticulous, and I'm giving him the credit for having done meticulous work. And the fact that he's still there demonstrates that they didn't have a case. So at least he wasn't just run out of town on a rumor or based on whether or not he was trending in a popular way on Twitter or not at Harvard. Although, based on certain things that have happened since then, maybe his days are numbered. I don't know, but that's the situation. So I guess, in light of all this, they're thinking about what is the future for scholarship. How do you encourage good scholarship in an environment that is so overheated and apparently filled with what they later call lemmings, trained lemmings? Any thoughts, guys?
Well, I mean, I think they're up against a massive problem, and they're the ones who helped create it. When you allow for that kind of shoddy academic work that is just steeped in ideology and trigger terms, and you basically create students who are triggered by those terms or anything related to challenging what they have now found as their kind of safe interpretation of reality. They look now at academics as one more aspect of, if anything causes any kind of anguish or suffering, truth or falsity doesn't matter. It has to go because it threatens the psychological well-being of these vulnerable people that will be impacted by that kind of scholarship. So, yeah, we've entered therapeutic scholarship, but with this kind of repulsive conditioning that you can't do true work with on controversial issues and not receive this kind of greeting anymore. I mean, this is what's there. And rather, like you would think, classic ways of engaging scholarship is, okay, I disagree with you. I'm going to write a better book than you, or I'm going to do a better work, and I'm going to show why your reading of that material is off. But no, it's let's act like it didn't happen. Let's get rid of this person. Let's cancel them from, any influence, and basically hide whatever they have to say.
I'm reminded of a quote that I think goes back to AOC, where she said something may not be factual, but it's true.
Right.
Something to that effect. And that's what we're dealing with here. Yeah. There is zero evidence for the things that they're trying to get this person fired for. There's zero evidence for that. Mm-hmm. He's got all the evidence on his side, but it doesn't matter, because what is true is that this happened because it's part of the mythology of the patriarchy.
Right.
Yeah, and myths are true regardless of whether they're factual.
Right. Yeah, the mythology of the patriarchy, I think, is the key thing here. I think what we need to do is just simply valorize a proper understanding of patriarchy rather than be embarrassed and run from it. Yeah. I just, it's like the name Presbyterian. Like in certain circles, if you say you're a Presbyterian, the mind immediately goes to PCUSA and, ordaining homosexuals and what have you. Does that mean that you just completely concede the term? You say, okay, that's what Presbyterian means from now on. It doesn't mean elderly man with authority, which is what it always meant. And now instead means I ordain homosexuals, or I'm a liberal. Nor do you fight for it? Do you get it back? Do you put it in the correct frame of reference, or at least in a more historically accurate frame of reference? I'd like to go back to this article, though, and reflect a little bit with you guys about how they are assessing the situation, or kind of their diagnosis of the problem. So this is Morgan again. He says, I've thought a lot about your canceling. I watched it unfold in real time. You and I have seen it happen to other people too. The insane attacks on you, the attacks on other scholars who go against the grain and challenge academic consensuses. This isn't just un-American. It's unacceptable behavior for human beings. It used to be that academic radicals urged us to, quote, question authority. Now the slogan in American academia seems to be, quote, you don't have the authority to ask questions, end of quote. How times have changed. And then Remsayer says, the nonconformists of the 1960s completed their PhD programs and joined the faculty. They took control, and at least in the humanities, they trained lemmings. And now those lemmings have come to fill the chaired professorships and call the shots. And the contemporary nonconformist doesn't stand a chance. That's this term. I think it's interesting. The contemporary nonconformist doesn't stand a chance. So students who want to think for themselves avoid the humanities. The smart ones might take economics or political science. More likely, though, they go into the STEM fields. The ones left over, the ones without intellectual courage, are practically the only ones who sign up for history and literature anymore. He says, I exaggerate, I know. I'm sure that I'm insulting some serious and capable students in those fields. But so they're not all lemmings, of course. But in fact, the fact that these fields are circling the drain is no longer a secret. And I think that's true. I mean, I think the enrollment in humanities programs, it's tanking everywhere, except conservative schools in places like obviously Hillsdale or NSA. And what are we to make of this? So I remember the old liberals. You guys do too. You didn't necessarily agree with the things that they said, but they were men of. They were almost always men, by the way, yeah. and they were men of principle. I remember Harvey Cox, or guys like that, who would listen carefully, try to point out your your mistakes, the faults in your reasoning process. I think my primary professor at Harvard, Ralph Potter, he was the administrator. He was the assistant to Reinhold Niebuhr, and he would talk about Niebuhr all the time. And we were on good terms. We were on friendly terms. He rarely agreed with certain things that I had to say, but he was always friendly and happy to interact with me. I never felt like my grade was on the line because I disagreed with him about something. He would point out problems. He'd say, this doesn't seem to follow from this, and that kind of stuff. But the people that I didn't take classes from were these folks, and you could see them, and recognize them without even talking to them. But that was the new wave. That was the younger people that were coming in. Many of whom were, radical feminists.
Yeah. Well, as perspective became the principal epistemology, the way of knowing, and that is all that started to get bound up with psychological interpretations of moral intent. Basically, that any claim to truth is really just a projection of all the things that make an advantage for me. Even if what I do seems to be at a disadvantage to me, it's still indirectly an advantage. Once that it gets embraced institutionally and becomes systemic, then basically anything that challenges that kind of, that dominant narrative that has hijacked a lot of higher education, they've inoculated themselves from critique. So you either go along with it, or you're going to be, like you say, harassed until you leave, or worse, violence is going to be used against you in the name of quote unquote rage, this rage that erupts all kinds of form that remind them of the patriarchy or white consciousness, or, any of these things that have become the straw man that, they attack to keep power in place. The thing is, and we all know it, you can use the very ideology against them, and the only reason they get away with it is, one, they're already in places of power, but secondly, because they act like they're the ones who have been marginalized and left out. So there's a moral claim. That's interesting, because Nietzsche wouldn't have cared about that. So they have to almost take a Christian notion of considering the underdog, because last I heard, nature, the way they understand it, is dog eat dog. It is all about powering up. And so I think, it's strange, but you have to, it will be interesting if society becomes more barbaric, if that kind of marginalized, left out of the picture narrative will hold in these institutions.
Yeah, that's been my response generally in the past when I've encountered this sort of argument. I've thought, well, okay, this is how it works. Okay, we're all just pursuing our own best interest or our own advantage. Why should I use or find myself frustrated in the pursuit of my interest by the fact that you don't like it? Well, tough. I'm just going to pursue my own interest anyway, and I'm not interested necessarily in being your friend, working with you at all. Too bad. Now, the rise of the new right, meaning the alt-right, has a very, at least portions of it, have a very self-consciously anti-Christian posture. Yeah. So you can either, my sense is that when it comes to those who are objecting to this, there's either a principled Christian objection, or you've got a kind of just raw, kind of Nietzschean reaction. Yeah. That's just, well, I'm a white man and I'm going to pursue my interests, and if you don't like it, that's just too bad. And by the way, if this catches on, we'll just see who's able to win.
Yeah, I've argued for years that the way white men have been blamed for all of the ills in society, and that this is being taught to kids, is a recipe for creating real white supremacists.
Yeah.
Both on the reaction of well, I'm not that bad, but if this is how they see me, I might as well act it out.
Right.
And the embrace of the Nietzschean side that you talked about. I mean, it just seems like that is going to be the inevitable result, unless the Christian, in a world where Christianity is losing its hold, that'll be the inevitable response. We need the Christian alternative out there.
Which brings me to the challenge, as I've been reflecting on this, is as people lose faith in particularly the humanities at the post-secondary level, what will people do? Where will they go when it comes to pursuing an interest in the humanities classically understood? I think that there are going to have to be new institutions that emerge.
New institutions or online courses, which maybe is the kind of institution you're thinking of. There's a lot of good material that's out there, but a lot of it is not being produced in the standard academies because they're too ideologically driven.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm getting at. I'm open to the online sort of thing as being one possible way to go. I do think, though, that particularly so long as there's still some residue of legitimacy to the academy as it is currently constituted, meaning the journals, the credentialing apparatus, that kind of stuff. You're going to have people who are torn. So I see this in my own family. I've got a son-in-law who would like to pursue a PhD, but he's really, wondering if there's a place for him to do that. He has an interest in history. Some of the people that he's considered studying under, they're older, retiring. He doesn't know whether or not they'll be around by the time he's done. And he's wondering, what he should do. Maybe he should just pursue something completely different. If there is a set of new institutions that emerge, will they have the rigor to command a position on the heights, intellectual heights, post the fall of the current regime? And that's where my questions about some of the online stuff and some of the new stuff that's come along. It seems to be good, but not able to command the respect that I think we need to be able to command.
Yeah, I would just like to point out that right now academics overwhelmingly write for other academics. So their material doesn't reach the public anyway.
Right.
Yeah. I think that, what I see in terms of the field of where the retrieval of classic theological wisdom is starting to make its inroads back into fields more widely. For example, you start to see theologians that aren't just interested in kind of the science and religion conversation, but actually rethinking the sciences from the rich Christian vision of reality and all of its implications. You could read someone like Mike Hanby's book, No God, No Science. That's a very technical first step. But then you have somebody who does it more accessible, drawing off of that kind, is like Paul Tyson's recent work that is dealing with natural science and that kind of rich Christian vision and rethinking the assumptions of science, but with a lot of those things lost. There was a more academic one, I think, Glenn, not long ago, that I think Milbank and some others, I think our good friend Kemper Crabb was reading. And you are starting to see that kind of depth, even though it's coming from a wide range of Christian perspectives. You are starting to see a certain consensus drawn that the shared riches of our intellectual heritage have far deeper resources for retrieving a healthy view of academic life. But it is just starting to trickle down to more accessible material through middle writing figures like Paul Tyson and the like.
I think related to that, Tom, too. These are scholars who are writing and doing their work somewhat on the periphery of the academy. Yeah. And now that's not a bad thing. I think that that's where usually the change occurs. If we were to go back to the 60s, that's where the women's studies programs were, on the periphery. So, these things have a way of moving into the center. So maybe that's it. Maybe there need to be institutes or programs that operate in that area. Now, those places are not going to be the center. They're not going to be the places where people get the academic cachet that they would get in other places. And there are also places where you need to have exceptional savvy and courage and even kind of entrepreneurial spirit. Mm-hmm. So new people who are coming along have got to have something that they see in those things that appeals to them and helps them to take the chance of throwing in their lot with this new thing. Yeah. There are other things like, Peter Thiel's approach, where he's basically saying, I'm going to give you a scholarship so you don't go to college and just kind of go directly into the field itself and kind of learn the old-fashioned way. And your credibility in that field will be just the work you've done. Maybe there's a place for the old man of letters in all this, the idea of almost the independent scholar. And
you have this kind of Christianity has continuously carried the weight of learning over and over again, developed incredible learning, have actually brought about what we know of today, the origins of the revolution in education. But you also think of small kind of schools of thought that developed, where that's where you had these amazing, comprehensive educational engagements take place. I mean, you think of Echo's work, where he's trying to get a hold of one of those in his stories, because they are so rich. And you don't know what kind of schools of thinking. I mean, even in like Cambridge, when I was a student at Oxford, you started to have the radical Orthodox group grow up. And I don't go along with everything they do, but you did have people at least seriously engaging Orthodox ideas in that on the academic level, and really owing a lot of debt to the previous work, Coleridge retrieval and figures like that has just, we're still talking about stuff they, and Lewis and the like, we're getting a hold of. I mean, you think of what the Inklings were up to and the impact they're really starting to see now, at a time where what they say has almost a prophetic tone and a directional tone.
Yeah. They saw, and they were able to say things that, kind of made it easier for other people to see what they were seeing. Although I still think, like, I probably read Abolition of Man for the first time in the early 90s or late 80s. And it struck me at that point as being an important book, and it made an impression on me. But I tell you, I read it today, and it's got almost got the level of prophecy, in the sense, because now I'm seeing it in hindsight, things that he described as coming in the future, that now we look at and say this is the world we live in.
And I think they also point, I'm talking on for people that are trying to get some orientation with learning when it's bad. They point in directions of how to take rich classic sources and utilize them to be educated, but also forming oneself to be discerning, to have wisdom, to get a hold of have an antenna for the times that is beyond just reacting. So that the learning they give just by their example is incredible.
Right. Yeah, I've tried to figure out how to categorize these guys. They're certainly not postmodernists. They're not modernists. They're not exactly anti-modernists, although that comes closest. They know how important it is to retrieve the classic tradition. They know how important the metaphysics and all of these things are. They understand them in a very deep way. But they also know you can't just simply retrieve them, because we're in the modern world, and you've got you've got to carry them through the modern world. Trying to clearly define their program is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But there's obviously something there, and maybe the very complexity of trying to explain what it is the very reason why they're so important and why they're catching so many people these days, because it's not a simple problem to solve, and they're not offering a simple solution.
Well, you even think about the fact that the novel as a literary form is a modern thing, and they're using it in a way that's undermining some of the very foundations of modernity. So it's remarkable stuff. Now, one of the things these guys talk about in this article is the lemming phenomenon, and as I've thought about it, I've got mixed feelings, because I think that we've always had a lemming phenomenon. It's not as though this is a new problem. It's just that the lemmings are moving off a different cliff this time. A cliff maybe we just didn't anticipate they'd ever jump off of. In case you're wondering what I'm referring to is apparently it was believed at one time, and I don't believe it's the case anymore, that scientists think this, but there was a phenomenon where you'd have a herd of lemmings, which is a little furry animal, kind of weasel-like, if I remember correctly, who would run headlong off a cliff into the sea. And so people used the image of the lemming as a herd-like creature that doesn't know where it's going and experiences very negative consequences in mass. Now, there are probably people out there who know what I'm talking about, but also know why that's no longer. But maybe that's actually kind of illustrating the point of this. This is like a pseudoscience that has gotten cultural cachet and shouldn't have it. But anyway, but I think the larger principle, maybe madness of crowds, whatever, it's always with us. And the question is, okay, in my mind, maybe there was a time when the lemming was a Christian. In other words, there was a kind of superficial, kind of herd acquired sensibility that characterized large swaths of the population, but it at least had been informed by Christianity and wasn't as sort of destructive as what we see here. Now, there could be, we can look back in the past and we can see all kinds of horrible behavior by people who said they were Christians, right? So it's not to deny that happens. But so are we trying to create a new herd of lemmings? Just our lemmings? Or is there something to human nature that implies that there's always going to be kind of a smaller group of people who genuinely want to know the nature of things, and by necessity are going to be kind of out of step with the lemmings, maybe not having to deal with violent, sort of job canceling behavior, but are always going to be just a little bit out of step with the larger world. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, what you're describing is the remnant.
Okay. So the remnant being the biblical understanding of a small group who remain faithful, even though everyone else has been faithless.
Well, and I think, that one of the difficulties, especially, that we're finding ourselves confronted with is people trying to disciple people in very complicated times. And again, there are complications that do differ than other times in the church's past, even though the church has had to wrestle with a lot of complicated things. And I think the fast-moving pace that maybe we should have been discerning better, previous generations and the like. You had figures trying to warn us, Lewis, Schaeffer, John Paul II. They definitely were people who stood out in their time and were trying to raise the alarm. And really, it's people that are trying to do the same thing now that are finding those sources so significant and drawing on them to be able to help, sound the alarm continuously. But I think with so many levels of I don't even know what the word is for it, but so many complicated levels that we're trying to bring wisdom in and deal with, formation and education and purposes and ends and meaning, that in many ways you feel like you're starting from the ground up, even though you're not. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I just taught a philosophy class at a Catholic institution for a lot of these students who have gone to Catholic high schools and the like. But the cluelessness of just basic terminology is far more radical this term than previous terms. And I feel like you're having to start from the ground up in ways, and sometimes that's okay. But in this case, it's usually not, because you're not starting the ground up. You're having to work with mush that is already inclined in very opposing ways.
Yeah.
And so, you feel you don't know where to go with it many times.
Now, I know you're looking at this from the outside, and you're dealing with, a product that maybe even the Catholic educators would be ashamed to claim as their own. But is it the cultural moment that you think is to blame, or has there been a slippage in, say, parochial education in Catholic schools? Is it both? Maybe is there something else? Any thoughts?
I would like to think that, some of the curriculum and approaches to education hadn't changed. But I haven't necessarily been an insider in a lot of the, like the secondary education that leads up to it. I've tried to get a hold of it. You do still have some that, like, if I assign a paper and they have to give a little theological analysis, they do pretty much better than even a lot of our seminary students on that end. But when it comes to kind of basic things of just critical thinking and analysis, that's the area that I'm finding a weakening, and I don't know exactly why. They used to be very strong in that area, and again, maybe the emphasis isn't there, or again, I think this kind of therapeutic shift in learning, and I think it's spilled over and it's impacting it's definitely impacting the seminary.
Well, and as a pastor, as someone who gets up and preaches every week, I do so very consciously in rebellion against, say, what I think of as larger trends within the evangelical world. So my listeners are privy to a conversation from one side. And so I'm responding to things, almost every Sunday that maybe aren't their direct questions, but are, sort of assumptions that are the basis for a lot of the evangelical ministry that goes on around them, and maybe they witness but don't have a sense of, or have an ability to, analyze. And so I think that the task of that I'm up against is, how do I promote high content Christianity in my congregation? When everything around them is encouraging a kind of lowest common denominator approach to things. That's the challenge.
Yeah, it is. And again, I think taking the rich things we have, which I don't think they have anything by way of comparison. I mean, therapeutic and affirmations of the self and all of that don't really deliver in the long run. And so, I think that, Scripture says it in, a very strong way: lift Christ up the right way and he will draw all to himself. And I guess that is the challenge, is how to do that in such a way that you are also allowing that radiance to do what it does, but also to allow it to distinguish from these lesser forms or eclipses that have taken hold of our churches and Christian, mindset. It's not easy because it's just like the whole trend to minister to a contemporary society by being contemporary. You import so many things when you don't, bring them along without the right kind of Christian engagement with them to see whether they're worthy or not to be an instrument in communicating the gospel. And I think because we've lost the ability to do that, we just say, oh, this is happening. I mean, I think there was some conference I saw floating around the internet of a men's conference where one of the, controversial pastors had to speak up because someone was doing a male strip show there. I mean, this is a case
Mark Driscoll, right?
Yeah.
When Mark Driscoll is your conscience, things have gotten to a bad spot.
You got an issue. Somebody, I saw somebody made a comment about they wear vestments. The pastor who would wear vestments. Might have been Yuri, but he said, okay, you need to understand that everything you do communicates something.
Right.
So if you preach in a suit, you are communicating, I am a professional like a doctor or a lawyer. Mm-hmm. If you communicate in a T-shirt and jeans, preach in T-shirt and jeans, you're communicating, hey, I'm just an ordinary guy like you guys.
Right.
If you preach investments, a Geneva robe is what he had, basically an academic robe with the stole. He says that communicates something really different. That communicates that, well, the Geneva robe originally communicated the fact that you were an educated man. Mm-hmm. But nowadays it communicates that, you are a sacred professional. You are someone whose task is specifically ministry.
Well, I'm sympathetic to Yuri's point. I also have some thoughts and observations that are not quite in sort of keeping with Yuri's. For a lot of people, vestments now means you might be a pedophile, just because of so many crises and so many different church institutions. I know that's not fair, but some people make that association. So it's almost like you have to live down the vestments now at certain points in time, not just because we live in a super casual society, but because people don't have any insight into what those vestments actually communicate. Historically, they only have the contemporary associations of, the nightly news and the latest flashing headline about what happened in, say, Ireland or in Boston in the 1970s or whatever like that, which is a real shame. So even then, you've got to do some work helping people understand what the different vestments mean and those that you did. In other words, you just can't assume that people get green or people get red. It's almost like now. Yeah, I think there's a visceral level where they get it, but at another level they can't put it into words.
Yeah, in his case, he's not talking about the full cope and alb and all of those kinds of things that a Catholic priest might wear. Right. It's just the Geneva robe with the stole around it, but still, point taken.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to denigrate any of that. I guess my only thought is that we have a big job of trying to communicate a lot of things, and I think that's what you were getting at, Tom. Is that it's almost like we can't take it much for granted anymore.
That's right.
You have to start out with some pretty basic stuff. So like one of the things that I do when it comes to the subjectivity and also kind of the emotivism of our time is I try to call emotions into question. And one of the ways and it's not hard to do, is just simply ask rhetorically, does everything that come into your mind deserve to be said? Does everything you feel, is everything you feel trustworthy? Have you ever been deceived by your emotions? Have you ever regretted acting on your emotions? Yeah. Doesn't that at least mean that that's not a good way to live.
Yeah.
There's some other things that maybe should come into play.
And then when you make radical decisions based on feelings or any thought that comes into your head, you could be chopping yourself up and then wanting to re-sew yourself back together. I mean, that's, not everything you think or feel needs to be acted on. And so there's a great stepping place right into.
And what I try to do is I try to take that, and this is something I haven't had anybody deny, but it's amazing that even though people don't deny that, they still kind of operate sort of automatically from that frame of reference. They assess the world, and they assess things based on whether it's authentic. What they mean by authentic is how I'm behaving corresponding to how I'm feeling. That's as far as it goes. But at the same time, they have an ability to evaluate themselves at another level. But it's exactly what James is getting at in his letter, where he says, you look at yourself in the mirror and you forget what you saw the moment you walk away. That's the role of the law. In other words, the law is intended to elicit a judgment. As you look into the law, you're judging yourself in light of the standard, or at least that's what you should do. The other possibility is you judge the law as unworthy for some reason and you reject it. So there's judgment going on either way. Either you're agreeing with what the law says and judging yourself, or you are judging the law as being unworthy, but it's not clear what the standard is if that's what you've done. But in either case, the true you is that judging self. That's the true you. And so you need to discover who that person is, and attend to that, because that's the real you. The feelings are not the real you.
Yeah, and I think that law richly, shows in that, where we sit as the real us. In other words, receiving ourselves worshipfully the right way, or whether we're dead in our trespasses, to use biblical language. And I think that because the law is life manifesting, because it is good, it exposes our death works and on ourself and our, but if we, as Christ said, if we embrace the law and through Christ's fulfillment of it enact it lovingly, loving God first and our neighbors ourselves, well, then we are part of that life manifesting orientation to our Creator, and we are who we were created to be. And so the law this is just a brilliant way of exposing us, and as well, and lets us see where our heart sits.
Yeah. That term, death works. What was the guy's name that coined that?
Was that Reef?
Reef. Yeah. Great. It's interesting. I was listening to an interview with Peter Thiel by somebody at George Mason here last week, and Thiel is he's a real character in a lot of ways, but he's also theologically very astute. He's very well read, and he was quoting Reef and Girard and just on the fly making comments on biblical, not in a kind of neo-orthodox Bardian way, but in a very serious way about the sort of the revelatory power of Scripture and how it reveals not just who God is, but who we are. And so he was taking this tack, and it was really refreshing stuff. And he had the audience just riveted. I think that's one of the things we're seeing right now is a recovery of biblical wisdom. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's coming from some really weird places.
Well, the growing appreciation among atheists for the Bible and for the Christian tradition.
Right. Yeah. Thiel was talking about the apocalyptic character of Scripture and just even periods of history where one age is passing away and a new age is beginning. And this is all biblical language.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, he's drawing off of the rich canon that used to be pretty secondhand to people in the West, and even if they took it sometimes badly, but it has almost been left out of academic and intellectual life. So to hear anyone talking about it is refreshing.
Well, I think that what we are at in the intellectual life in the West with postmodern approaches to knowledge is that we're at a crisis point. A crisis meaning, in the old, meaning of the word, a time for judgment. This is a time for judgment, and not just human judgment, God's judgment on the West. I think what we're living through right now is a epoch transition, and it's a very interesting time to be alive. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And what will emerge on the other side? Well, whatever it is, God's in charge and Christ is Lord, but it's not entirely clear that the institutions that we've taken for granted that we thought were unassailable. We all remember when we all believed that the Soviet Union was implacable, when it was just going to be, it almost felt eternal in character. It seemed as solid as anything could be from the outside, and then it just came crashing down overnight, and we were all stunned. And this is how this all feels right now. I mean, the Ivies. I mean, so what? You got $50 billion. I mean, the United States is in debt how many trillion? It's just...
And the value of what they used to think, sometimes produced is gone now. You still have...
It's a laughing stock.
Yeah. So they're working off of memory. Once that memory fades out, which has happened rapidly, it's the capacity to sell itself isn't going to be what it was.
Yeah, there used to be, kind of a blue-collar contempt for the life of the mind that was in part fossil, in the sense that they were trying to shore up their own confidence and try to valorize the blue-collar way of life. But now they've actually got something that they can, just kind of roll their eyes at. I mean, when guys who are wiring houses and plumbing them are just rolling their eyes when the name Harvard comes up or Yale, and just a bunch of jokes, and they really mean it, and it's not trying to deal with their own inadequacies. Then
back when the Claudine Gay scandal broke out, there was a Dilbert that. Where the pointy-haired boss is interviewing a job candidate, and he says, "On your resume, it doesn't say anything about having a degree." And he says, "Oh, I went to college." And he says, "You went to Harvard, didn't you?" And the candidate says, "I'll show myself out."
That's a great note to end on. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode of the Theology Pugcast. If you've been to an Ivy League school, we feel for you, and you can live it down. And who knows what's in store? But anyway, you can maybe benefit. Hopefully, you have been benefiting from the Theology Pugcast and our own attempts to think out loud with you. And if that's the case, and you want to support us, there is a way to do that through Patreon. We've got our own Patreon account, and a number of people support us and pay the bills on an ongoing basis. And if you'd like to join that intrepid band, you can follow the link in the show notes. Anyway, that's enough for now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. To learn more about the church, you can visit trinityreformedkirk.com. trinityreformedkirk.com.